Apologies from Councillor Daly, Councillor Dunbar and Mr Hodgson.
Right. I think we're all aware of what happened in Hexham on Friday, so I've got a statement to read. You can have it after if you so wish, but it's explain. This was for Wayne, but it's for me to read. I want to start today's meeting by reflecting on the tragic events that took place in Hexham last Friday night. As you all know, a young girl, a 15-year-old pupil at Queen Elizabeth High School, Holly Newton, suffered fatal injuries following an incident in the town centre, while a teenage boy also suffered serious injuries. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with murder and attempted murder. I think I can speak for all of us saying that this incident has come as a complete shock to our community, and our thoughts are with the families and friends of all those touched by this. Earlier this week, Holly's family issued a statement through the police paying tribute to her, and I would like to read an extract. Holly was such a bright and bubbly girl who was so passionate about her family and many friends. She was a much-loved daughter, granddaughter, sister, niece and cousin. Holly was always a popular girl who was loved by so many, not just in Hexham, but all over the North East. Holly also loved dancing and was so talented. The big part of her spare time was spent at classes and taking part in competitions up and down the country. She had a whole life ahead of her, and we are still coming to terms with the fact that our beautiful, loving girl is no longer with us. And that's from the family. From the outset, the council has been working closely with Northumbria Police and other organisations to provide all the help it can. We've put in place a wellbeing support for both staff and students at Queen Elizabeth High School. This help will be in place for the foreseeable future to ensure both staff and students at the school are fully supported during this upsetting time. Over the coming days, weeks and months, we will continue to provide all the help we can to the families, friends, school and wider community. Our help will also not stop once the story fades from the headlines. I would end by reminding you all that this is an active and ongoing police investigation, and we must respect that process and not speculate. On this point, I would ask that there is no further comment or discussion on this case during this meeting. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody? Councillor Dale?
Just to say that on page 3 and 4, at the meeting, there was a discussion about the local plan, and obviously some people were watching the meeting and asked, and it came up actually at the area committee when we had the meeting with the leader, came up about when the local plan was being under review. And obviously you'd informed this meeting that it was under review. Can we have some clarification on that, please? Because there has been concerns raised, and I think we need to ensure that the people, the residents, parish council exactly know the position about the local plan.
I was on the working group, and I was led to believe, and I still stand by it, it's every 5 years.
Pardon?
Every 5 years it's reviewed.
Is it under review at the moment, though?
Well, it's just gone through, so I would imagine the process starts, but I think we'll get clarity for you.
I think the parish councils deserve that. Thank you.
Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. Page 6 of our papers today. I'm sure there's no conspiracy because it's not the first time this has happened. But the membership of the Task and Finish group lists Councillor Swinbank, which obviously isn't correct because he's not a member of this committee, and that name needs to be corrected for my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swinbank. Right, anybody else on the minutes? Disclosure of members' interest. Any disclosures? I see no hands, so I move on. Forward plan of key decisions. Chris?
Thanks, Chair. The forward plan is there for members to note. There's nothing on the forward plan that isn't already sort of set aside for the work programme.
I see no hands, I'll move on. Item 5, Cabinet Report, School Admissions Arrangements for Community and Voluntary Control Schools for the academic year. Sue?
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. Yes, this is an annual report that we bring both to FACS and to Cabinet in line with the Schools Admissions Code. We need to determine our admission arrangements for those community and voluntary controlled schools. And again, it's well in advance of the academic year, so it's for 24-25. But there are some additional decisions that we're asking Cabinet to make this year, and that's in line with the strategy set out in our school organisation plan to look at reducing planned admission numbers across the county. So this year we are looking to reduce the planned admission number at Northburn Primary School, Hipsburn, Shilbottle Primary Schools, as well as a reduction in PAN at the Duchesses High School, again in line with our plans. And we're also looking to amend one catchment area that impacts on Broomhill First School, Felton Primary School, James Calvert Spence College and Duchesses High School. And again, they're all set out in the report. So really just to any updates, there have been some minor amendments to the current admissions policy, and that's following a review of our arrangements by the Office of the Schools Adjudicator. However, they're minor administrative amendments, and there are no amendments to the oversubscription criteria for first, primary, middle, high and secondary schools. And again, full copies of those policies are contained within the appendices of your report. What we do need to do as part of setting our admissions code is to carry out a 6-week consultation. So again, that took place between the 11th of November and the 23rd of December. And again, during that period of time, we did receive 4 responses, one from each of the schools affected by the proposed reduction in PAN. And again, a full copy of their responses is contained in appendices 4 of the report. The schools themselves did appreciate that the proposed reduction in PAN was linked to the fall in the pupil population. Again, something that we've discussed and debated here at FACS Scrutiny on many occasions, and now we're starting to see the individual impacts on schools, hence the request to reduce these planned admission numbers. Schools, however, though, did raise concerns again about reducing parental choice by reducing planned admission arrangements, and they'd also got concerns about siblings already in the school and the potential impact that families would withdraw older siblings if they couldn't access places for younger children. There was also some dissatisfaction with the way the consultation process had been run, particularly about informing schools prior to the publication of the consultation. And again, we've taken full acknowledgement of what the concerns were, and we'll make sure that they're addressed in future years. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Right. Anybody want to comment? We have to. This is a Cabinet report. Guy, do you want to comment on this?
My only comment would be that we don't have full control over the admissions process that our academies use, but we do have a very good relationship with our academies in trying to persuade them to follow the admissions process that we all work together to try and produce. So while there may be some issues throughout the county with academies not following our admissions arrangements, we are working on that, and through constructive dialogue.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Swinburne?
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of points on this. As we've discussed in previous reports that's come here, it's very difficult with regards to numbers for schools and the planning, etc. And we do come under a lot of, I'm going to say, criticism or questions, queries with regards to housing developments as to, why aren't they building more schools and more space? And I think this sort of shows that the perception of need isn't always there, because we're having to take action to reduce some intake numbers in some areas. So the public perception that we have to be expanding isn't always correct. And we do have that declining need, and this is why this is having to follow through. One of the things I wanted to ask is on page 28, 40, there's 2 page numbers on here, so excuse me if I've got the wrong one. It goes on about fraudulent applications and withdrawal of school places. And it's sad that there are times when officers have to allocate a great deal of time to confirm accurate information on applications, but I was just wondering, what sort of figure is there with regards to what's false declarations? How much time and money and what numbers are there with regards to these false declarations? So I'm looking at a rough figure of sort of time and resources we have to spend, officers have to spend, and what sort of number are actually false as well.
Can you give them that? Or?
I don't know the actual number, but what I can say is initially our admissions team will do some initial investigation. Very often, sometimes we will get whistleblowing about certain applications, and it's at that point that we do involve the fraud team here at NCC, that they would then take up that investigation on behalf. So in the past, places have been withdrawn. Probably during my time being responsible for school admissions, probably know about a dozen over the last sort of 15 years. Very often, parents themselves will make alternative choices without us having to take any formal action, shall we say. But yes, particularly in some areas of our county where we border other local authorities, shall we say, it is a problem, or has been in Ponteland particularly, people using Ponteland addresses. Because of the popularity of those schools in that area. It's probably our biggest challenge, shall we say, from an area. But not massive numbers at all. Okay.
Councillor Watson?
Thanks, Chair. Just on the areas of dissatisfaction, I'm just wondering if you can expand a little bit on what they were. I'm a parent of 2 boys that fall between 2 and 18, and I can't recall being notified of the consultation, so I'm just wondering what the areas were on that side. And I'm a little bit confused about the catchment proposal at Broomhill, Felton and James Calvert School, because we're being asked to approve the amendments to the catchment areas, but on page 35, your 23, I think, it says this consultation will ensure that all stakeholders that might be impacted by any change to the catchments, including those schools, will have the opportunity to have their say. And I wasn't clear on whether that bit's been done and they've had their say, or whether we're just some clarity on that side of things.
So in terms of the catchment areas, the individual schools were consulted, have received the information, but didn't respond. I think the minor amendment affects probably 2 families that are already attending Felton School. Not necessarily about their admission into school, but it obviously impacts on the transport arrangements and free transport to schools. So I think that has been more of the issue, shall we say. So I think they've been consulted. No concerns from any schools. It's a very small hamlet of houses. The road distance and the quality of road is better to get the children into Felton than it actually would be to Broomhill. So we've picked that up from a parental complaint initially, probably about 12 months ago, but we couldn't address that until we'd actually been through these processes. So the consultation has happened. Everybody's had their opportunity, obviously, to express their views. In terms of the dissatisfaction with the consultation, it was the individual schools and head teachers. basically we called them up to have a conversation, or some members of my team called them up, had some conversations with them to explain that we were going to consult on the reduction of their PAN and explain why. And I think it was the fact is that they would have preferred a face-to-face meeting rather than a telephone call, and an opportunity to involve their governor, their chair of governors, in that discussion as well. So we've picked that up. We did follow it, the phone calls with face-to-face meetings this time, set out all the data and information, and I think that they understood through the process, but I think they would have preferred a face-to-face meeting in the first place. So we've picked up those individual comments. And again, the consultation is put on the council's website. There are no real changes to the admissions criteria, so we wouldn't normally expect floods of responses from parents, because in the main there's no changes to it either. We do have to every 7 years do a more broad consultation, and that is when you as a parent will receive a letter via school. Even if we're not making any changes, we do have to do a whole scale, much larger consultation, and I think that's coming up in about 2 years' time. Okay, thanks.
Right, Councillor Dallas Aitken.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks for raising that, Councillor Watson, the concerns with the consult themselves. I'm wondering if we can seek any kind of reassurance on the priority given to siblings, because that obviously came up, for the sake of family and community cohesion, really, if we're wanting people to use these local schools to keep them together. Could that be, influenced in any way or made priority?
Well, the criteria are set there. There is a sibling link. It does form part of the criteria when we've got more applications than places. So there isn't any proposal in this arrangement to bring that further up the criteria. Again, if a family doesn't get in, they have the right to appeal. They can go through an independent appeal process, and the panel will listen to those issues and family concerns, and that would be for the independent panel to actually make that decision. Okay.
All right, anybody? Councillor Dale?
Yeah, just to carry on what Councillor Swinburne was saying, what I would like to note is some of the PANs are very low, very small numbers, and that obviously is a concern that we need to keep an eye on to ensure that there is sustainability there.
I think, as the report I think I brought to the last Facts Committee was about school organisation and the reduction that we've got in the birth rate across Northumberland. I think I said to you at the time that, last academic year to the previous academic year, we got 2.5% less children actually in our schools in Northumberland, and therefore this will be an ongoing process around reducing planned admission numbers. That helps schools plan better financially and curriculum in order to have the right school organisation within their own schools. What we're not doing is proposing to close any schools at the moment. Again, educating our children as close to their home communities as possible is definitely one of our education priorities, and therefore what we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got the right planned admission number without the need to close our small rural schools.
Yeah, it is a problem that we know is coming. Anybody else? I don't see. We have to agree this. Are we happy that we let this go forward without too much fuss? Yeah, everybody seems to be happy. I'll move on. Item 6, Virtual School Head Teachers Annual Report. And I'll go to Jane Walker. Now, are you going?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm Jane Walker. I'm Northumberland's Virtual School Head Teacher. So in terms of my report, I think although there's the usual mixed bag of education outcomes for our looked after children, overall more went well and improved for them last year than in the last 2 years, despite the considerable challenges I think they themselves as individuals and their schools faced. So I think what the achievement information in the report is telling us is that some of our children do really well at school, that the direction of travel is generally getting children back on track, but that recovery from the missed learning and the disruption of the pandemic is realistically going to take quite a few years. Good school attendance, I think, underpins success for any child of any age, so the improvement in attendance for our looked after children last year is very encouraging. I think it's worth pointing out that the high proportion of pupils progressing into further education is still encouraging, impressive, a good thing, given the challenges that this cohort have faced over the last 3 years, not just in their education, but their social challenges as well. So perhaps this is the reason for the dip, not in the numbers going into FE, but the numbers going into FE on level 3 courses, which are like the equivalent of A levels. But nonetheless, the further education and higher education numbers are still really encouraging for us here in Northumberland. In September this year, so not captured in that report, we did hear that we are successful in becoming part of a post-16 pilot to trial pupil premium plus grant funding, the aim of which is to get more young people into further education and to keep them there until they complete their courses. So I'm hoping when I report to you next year about progress that some will have been made as a consequence of that pilot. On the theme of grant funding, we do get grant funding into the virtual school, which I talk about in the report, in a similar way to how real schools do, to support that recovery and getting back on track after the pandemic. What we want to do with that grant funding is make sure schools have the expertise and skills to meet the complex needs of the children before reaching out to other support services. I think the report shows that we do that quite successfully already, but we are hosting a conference this March, which is a multi-agency conference that we're hosting with BU, which is the Northumberland's Emotional, Mental Health and Wellbeing team. And it's called Relationships Matter, and we're trying to launch a big multi-agency event that's going to really help us realise our ambition that all Northumberland schools are attachment aware and trauma informed, and that this will again have an impact on the education that our children have, and that the impact of that will show itself in better outcomes. So the role of the virtual school head itself has really changed over the last few years with additional responsibilities. So we now have a role with previously looked after children, and as of last year we have a role to promote the education of all children with a social worker. So this is all really positive. It's all really reassuring that nationally the levels of need of these children regarding their education are being acknowledged. And then underpinning these developments is the need for good school attendance. So as the Education Welfare Service is already part of the virtual school in Northumberland, we're in a really strong position to respond to that kind of interrelated initiative. So again, another positive for us. And then I always talk to you, and I always talk to the corporate parenting advisory group about stability and the importance of stability for our children in all aspects of their life, but in particular in making sure that they can all do the best they can at school, whatever their starting point and whatever their circumstances, they've done their best. And as a parent, as a good corporate parent, that's what I want for all of the children who work with us in the virtual school. The challenges around school stability remain. So school stability can be affected with an undue number of suspensions, the need to change schools if a child hasn't got stable relationships with adults and with other children in the school. So for us, a lot of our attention and a lot of our resources go into those very issues for the children. And those challenges were very apparent last year, and I've devoted quite a bit of the report to explaining them and what we did to address them. But also to let you know that they are continuing this year. There are still lots of challenges around stability for the children. So what we're doing is continuing to do what we know works well, and we're also trying some new ideas. So we're trialling a new post-16 personal education plan, so that's for the children still in care at 16 and those leaving care. We've actually commissioned the support of an occupational therapist for the first time, and she starts with us in a couple of weeks' time. She'll be doing a lot of training rather than one-to-one work with the children. So training up our staff at the local authority and staff in schools to see if that's an initiative that's going to make a difference for some, if not a lot of the children. And we're doing the usual things, like we've planned an Easter school for Year 6 and Year 11 children, which will be coming up soon with one of our tuition partners. So there's still plenty going on there, but a long way to go. And I think it's important that you know that what I've highlighted in the report as issues with stability are continuing, but are being challenged. We're trying to do something about that. So
Right.
Over to everyone else.
We've got to note, etc., and scrutiny and challenge. Any questions or challenge? Yep. I'll take Guy first, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. This is always a good report, and Jane does a fantastic job on the virtual school and has done ever since I've been portfolio holder, and before that chairman of FACS, so we're going back about seven years now. It's always a pleasure to read this one. One of the things I'd like to highlight is page, it says page 82 on here, that doesn't seem right, page 4 of the report, which is the good corporate parenting and the links that the virtual school have set up between Morgan Sindel, who are building the Northumberland line, and also Tharsis down in South East Northumberland. And that really is an example that highlights the priorities of the administration, because we've always said, what's the point in improving educational outcomes if those people therefore then don't have anywhere to work locally? And we've always said, what is the point of improving business and industry in the county if those business and industries aren't employing local people? You know, if they're going out and employing people from outside the county, then we have failed in our industrial strategy. So this highlights both, you know, I don't think I've seen something like this before in the county, and certainly within the northeast, of us going out to private industry and from the very outset getting a relationship between our looked after children and those services. So I'd really like to highlight that as a triumph for the council.
Thank you. Mr. Rickard?
I think just to celebrate the achievements in terms of what you have achieved at a glance page, and I was pleased to see that the big priority still remains attendance, because persistent absence 23.2% is an alarming figure, and I'm just wondering, which key stage is that predominantly at? Is that because of the transient nature of the group that you have moving to establish a routine? And if that's the case, as it's priority one, what is the plan to try and get those children into those sessions, but notwithstanding 100% understand how difficult that is?
Yeah, I mean, persistent absence is high at the moment for all young people, or higher than it usually is, and obviously it's had a disproportionate impact on that group of looked after children. It is high for a group of school-aged looked after children. Engaging in school is a real challenge for them. There may be social or health reasons for that, or it may be around the education itself, whether they can't establish relationships in school, whether they just can't engage in the learning, whether the gaps in their education are so significant by the time they come into care that actually the catch-up is just a big disincentive for them to be in the school at all. And I think that has increased realistically over the last couple of years, because the schools themselves are struggling to meet their needs in that respect, that actually there are so many diverse needs within a school community now, that actually those of the looked after children I don't think are lost, but they're so complex that actually the mainstream school a child might be in no longer meets their needs, and we have to look for alternatives to make sure that they get a good curriculum in place. So I think they all do contribute to that persistent absence. My colleague here, this is Sarah Winchingham, who's actually our Principal Education Welfare Officer, and Sarah's come today to add to any of those queries that you might have. And Sarah was just telling me when we came in that actually the Education Committee has now just commissioned a review into persistent absence across the country, which was interesting to pick up. I mean, it's an obvious thing there to look into further. But we're hoping we'll get the opportunity to take a perspective from children in care into that as well. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sarah.
I think just to add that we're offering additional support through the Education Welfare Team to look after children in attendance, and we have Education Welfare Support Officers that can work one-to-one with those children. So we are looking to offer that additional support for those that are really struggling to attend school on a regular basis.
And I think, Chair, that's really reassuring, because I guess that was more my point of, is the funding being directed to actually make a difference? Because those children need that chance, but if they're not there, they're not going to get it. So as long as we're comfortable that the funds, that the resources being put in, because absolutely accept and agree all those barriers are there, but it's what investment do we put in now to get rid of the barriers to learning. So I'm pleased to hear that you're able to do that, particularly one for those children, because I do think you're at a stage where that will be the only thing that works. So thanks.
And just to add the reassurance that we do know who the persistent absentees are, We are working with them, and we do know that they're safe when they're not in school. So, you know, they are known to us, and their needs are very well known to us.
So can I ask a supplementary question then?
Yeah,
Sorry,
go
Chair. How then is the join up if these children are known to social care as well? What reassurance can we have about the fact that there is that kind of triangulation of it's not just your responsibility, but also going into social care, going into education, welfare, help, whatever it is? How does that join up together to make sure that we hit everyone at the right time?
Yeah, that's all done through the care teams. So the virtual school, if we're not part of the care team, we'll crash into the care team. We know how to work with all of those other professionals who are working with the child. So that includes the social worker, obviously. Do you want Graham will add?
I've got Councillor Ball.
Thanks, Chair. So I do feel like it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, because this, I'm sure on this report I said exactly the same last year. The content, it's all what we've done brilliantly and the good stuff, but then there's only one page about the improvements. And there's a lot of numbers in the headline grabbers. That what do that actually mean when you've got 9% of people have previously had a social worker, 1 in 10 children need a social worker, 1,224 school age are known to previously looked after. It's what do these jump out? And it's like another page as well with the same kind of 100% of care leavers completed university degrees. Well, how could 100% of them, you know what I mean? So it's like there's a lot of headline actually that don't really have any content behind them. Yeah. And then it's like, what's the measurables? What is the progress? Because 28% of people have made progress in at least 4 subjects. What's progress? Is it actually turning up to the class? Is it getting a GCSE? Or, you know what I mean? So, and just when it comes down to the improvement plan for 22-23, again, it's 1 page. I would like, we've got pages and pages of what we've done brilliantly, but actually, how are we going to make sure that we get improved attendance, that we're working with the different... So I would like more about actually, this is how we are going to deliver the improvement plan as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I get feedback every year about the format of the report, and I will take all of that on board. Some of it's just giving you the idea of the context that we're working in. So the first things that you explained were actually what the picture looks like for our children with a social worker altogether at the moment. And I think the numbers are an important thing there because the numbers are very high, and it gives you the idea of how many children have passed who either are open to or have been open to social care. And you can ask your own questions around that because it's about your curiosity as councillors and as parents and as people in the community in Northumberland to understand what's going on there, what our pupil population or child population looks like. So that's fine. 100% of children achieving their degrees means that all of those doing a degree achieve their degree. So, you know, that kind of thing is easy to explain in the report. And just to say that I take your point about the priorities for improvement, but there is a virtual school improvement plan in place which expands on all of those priorities and has all of the actions that we're working to now and have been since September, which will then inform what the content of the annual report is for next year. So point taken, and I'll take that all on board for next year's.
Graham, did you want to come in? I've got Suzanne.
I think Jane's covered. I might come back at the end, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Suzanne. Fairly see, can I have it written down wrong?
Thank you. Yes, I found it very telling, page 91, about the smaller class sizes. Just of interest, you know, that they did well there, and since we've come back, that's been a problem in an ideal world and all that. But yeah, I found that very interesting. But going back to the school stability, and you mentioned this, I'm kind of interested more in sort of early years, kind of preventing that happen, very much so. And the Department of Education report on SEND provision says that 70% of students, LAC students, have SEND needs. And your figures are very, very low on that. They're kind of 22% and 33 with an ECHP plan. And I'm wondering about early identification of that as being an issue when these children are flagged up or come into your care, that they do, you know, these unidentified problems later do become stability issues, disruptive issues as the child gets older. And I'm wondering how early these are assessed, because the figures are very, very different from what the Department of Education provides.
Yes, and that's absolutely right. So we've always had a lower proportion compared to nationally, but those within the HCP, for example, are rising slowly year on year, and the reason for that is just as you've said. I think there is an identified need there. So we work with schools as closely as we can to go through that process if it's at all appropriate, and the numbers are gradually rising. In terms of in comparison to you know, the 70% that you talk about now is just over half at the moment. Usually it is around about 2/3. I think there has been a gap, particularly at the early years level, while we had the absence from school. I think that is one of the gaps for me that's emerged, not just in the achievement of children in comparison to other children, but actually things like that have had a real impact, that if children weren't in contact with professionals, then actually needs weren't being identified in a way that they might have been if the children are in school all day, every day. So I think we are playing a little bit of catch up around that. But yes, I mean, I think we've just always got to be alert to that. And whenever you're working with a looked after child, or a child comes into care and we're putting the personal education plan in place, the first assessment that is done is around their needs, what their needs are, and whether those needs have already been known by the professionals working with them. What we did introduce a couple of years ago was an educational psychology assessment for every child on entry to care, and it was with exactly that in mind, that actually not enough was known for a teacher to plan a lesson or for a pastoral support person to work with that child. And that's had a big impact.
Oh, good.
But I think we do still have a way to go.
Yes, it sounds like you are playing catch-up. Thank you for clarifying that.
Reverend Lennox, and then Councillor Deal.
This is an excellent report, and I look forward each year to reading the report. As a statistician, I like to see the numbers. But I think it's important that the numbers are clarified and amplified, as it's already been indicated. I find one particular set of numbers quite impressive, where 3 young people, 100%, gain degrees, as it were, in terms of that. It's a pretty impressive statistic, that. And I would like to have seen a little bit more detail about, you know, those involved.
Yes, again, I can include more detail around that, and I'm really pleased that you've pointed that out, because for our young people it's not necessarily getting on the course in the first place, it's actually being able to stay there till the end, until they achieve the qualification, which is quite often the personal achievement for them. So yes, I'm really proud of that one.
Councillor Deal. Anne, can you proceed?
Right, just say first of all, thank you very much for the report, and it has got some really good points in. And I think what we have to recognise, and I recognise, is the concerns about COVID and the knock-on effect, because that must have been terribly difficult for you and your staff to look at all the concerns you have to, and all your issues and everything else during COVID. And I think that obviously, and I think this is not just across this report where you're saying about early years, I think that's happened across the board throughout all the schools with the early years preparation. So I just say thank you. I do notice you're not yet good enough, but you've got fabulous, you know, good points. You know, there's everything and improving, which is good. So the only one I would have a concern about is this persistence absence, which must be very difficult for you to manage. So that would be one good thing, but also the early years good level of development, and obviously that's something which hopefully will improve now we're out of COVID, and you can get a grasp. What I really would like to ask is, I mean, we used to have the early years partnership within our schools, where we picked up the new mothers coming through, so when they got the children were preparing for school, that everybody worked with them, so when they came to school they were prepared. And is that still happening anywhere within your, when you I know these are children in need in care, but how hard are you working with the parents, and how easy is it?
The short answer is yes, we do we do work with children preschool age. We know who they are. We like to know what their needs are. We like to know who's already involved with them. So there's an early years passport system in place in Northumberland, which Dave will be able to tell you a lot more about in a lot more detail than me. But we do work with David's team and make sure that every looked after child has an early years passport, and that is really a kind of pre-personal education plan. It's like a pre-PEP. So if the child is still in care by the time they're school age, that actually we've already got the right information about the child. We're already doing work with them and making sure the right support services are in place for when they come into school. But yes, the report does highlight how big that gap is at the moment, and they're children who for a couple of years weren't in school or weren't necessarily engaging in the nurseries in school, weren't necessarily engaging with their provision, because they are entitled to the 2 and 3 year old provision. So what we've done with them, we normally work more closely with the foster carers around that. So we provide them with resources, we signpost them to the right advice and guidance about the development of their child at home and that kind of school readiness, getting to that school readiness. But again, I think we have to be realistic about that. There is a big gap there. We can say that it was expected given what we knew happened in the pandemic, but actually we really have to be proactive to try and close that gap and get more children in care ready for school so that they're ready to learn and do their best from the get-go.
Thank you for that. That's reassuring. The other thing is just very to say we do actually have local businesses who actually work with and are willing to work with children in care to progress their careers or actually lift their aspirations and give them an idea. So that is actually ongoing outside, not just there, but it's going on outside. So it's something that there are lots of people doing lots of good things. So thank you.
Right, before bringing Councillor Swinburne.
Yeah, just to reinforce the wider points about early identification need, just refer to the Family Hub papers of work that's been presented to this committee in the past, again, just giving the wider view of the range of joined up and partnership services that are being developed further to support early identification of need.
Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for bringing this here, Paula. I was pleased to see the individual examples throughout the report here. Because that adds a bit more weight, a bit more authority to this and a bit more evidence behind it. So a couple of things. On page 4 of your report, you mentioned that there's no permanent exclusions for the 14th consecutive year, which obviously for the work I've done previously, I'm really pleased to see about. On page 11, it mentions 31 number of schools using exclusions. Is that just the number of schools using them? That's not 31 exclusions, is it?
No, it's 31 schools who have had looked after children in them last year did use exclusion with their children as a form of behaviour management.
All right, because it's got 95 total suspensions, which is obviously disappointing because of the work that we do, and I hope we can look at working on those.
So it means one child is experiencing more than one exclusion in that school. Yeah.
Okay. You've mentioned absences, and I'm pleased you've mentioned that there. I'm aware of the legislation and the work going on around that, and we do have a report coming on next about that. The numbers that are throughout this, now I'm a numbers person anyway, what I would like to see, and I know it's been difficult with the pandemic, and that's been mentioned through here, I would like to see some trends on here, so we can see what's been happening. And some of the reports we used to get, the facts, used to have these trends so that we could see the ups and downs and what had happened previously. So I would like to see that. And I know on some of the education results, there's a table there with some numbers. I think some people might find it easier seeing like some sort of lines and something like that. Some might not. I'm one of those, I can easily view those things. One of the other things that I'm going to ask, and this came up in the task and finish group previously, we measure or we have information on national data, compare ourselves with that. Do we have anything for a comparison with regional data, or do we do any comparison with anywhere else? Now, obviously, if we're looking at national figures, everyone feeds into that. So if those national figures are higher, that means that somewhere else in the country is doing very well. So what I'm getting at there is there opportunities, we may do it anyway, to look at other areas of the country and see what they're doing as to what works well. You know, what are they doing that might be working better than perhaps what we're doing, and can we learn from that? So is that happening? If we had more information in here to say this area is scoring here, I'm not saying it's a measure that we should be measuring against that area, but it's something that we could be maybe learning from other areas. So that's what I was trying to point out there.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. So in terms of the trends, I haven't put trend information in this year because doing the trend over the last 3 years is a little bit tricky, given there were no SATs and there were GCSEs, but they were all centre assessed. They weren't taken with exams either. So I haven't put that in because the comparisons are really quite tricky for such a small cohort. You know, the messaging that might come out of that could be misleading. So I haven't done that, but that will, I have done in the past, and that will happen again once we've got the trends in place. So this year, for example, we'll put the comparisons in for last year. So in terms of other local authorities, there is a National Association of Virtual School Heads, and we're very close with each other. We work very closely together. So, you know, whether that's through webinars, whether it's through conferencing, all of that kind of thing, we know what's going on where. The webinars are always theme-based, so we can look for good practice around particular themes, attendance, persistent absence, for example, in other local authorities. But we also have a regional association of virtual school heads. We know each other very well. We very often work with each other's children. So not a lot of Northumberland children go to schools in other local authorities, but a lot of children from Newcastle and a lot of children from North Tyneside can find themselves in Northumberland schools. So we do work really closely together. And again, we have regular meetings, but we also have themes around the sharing of good practice. What I've just mentioned about the Pupil Premium Plus pilot at Post 16, we've already linked up with the other regional authorities on that pilot to make sure that we're not, first of all, doing the same thing, but that we can support each other, get ideas from each other about how to progress with that. So we do a lot of that. And I think it's worth knowing that the National Association also has really strong links with Ofsted and the DFE. So we're a very close community in that respect, and a lot of sharing of good practice takes place.
Thank you. Now, I've got to note the report. Are we happy to move on? Thank you. Are you about to go? I just need to take that away from you, Audrey. It says joint interim. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's no longer interim. I'll put that over there. Right, next item. I think it's you again, Jane. Children not in school.
Yes. Right, okay, so children not in school. This report is about 3 specific groups of children who are not in school full-time, like during the hours of a normal school day, for a variety of reasons. So I'm going to address those in the report as those who are poor attenders, children who are at risk of missing from education, and electively home-educated children. So school attendance in Northumberland before the pandemic was always good in all phases, special school, primary and secondary. Since the pandemic, like every other local authority, it's not as good as it was before then. It is starting to improve, very slowly, but it's not as good as it was. So there is now new DFE guidance called Working Together to Improve School Attendance. And when it's fully implemented, I think that will make a difference to overall attendance. And we're working on the implementation of that now. We have had confirmation from the DFE that the guidance is going to be statutory from September 2023. And like other aspects of the schools bill that have been dropped, this hasn't been, so this will go ahead. One of the real positives, or that Sarah and I think is a real positive about the new guidance, is that the DFE will introduce compulsory electronic registers for all schools, academies, independent schools. And that'll give us access to live attendance data, not just about the school, but about individual pupils in the school. So it's currently being trialled, and 110 of our Northumberland schools have volunteered to participate. So Sarah and her team are already able to use that to make sure we're getting the right support to schools at the right time. around their attendance improvement. So attendance improvement is very much the strapline now. Previous to this guidance, actually the requirement was only to record attendance accurately. So the idea that we're taking a multi-agency approach to improving attendance is really very welcome. So also reassurance around that is that obviously children not in school does raise some concerns around the safeguarding of them, and we have to ask the question that if they're not in school, where are they and are they safe? So Sarah and I also report regularly to Northumberland's Children and Adult Safeguarding Partnership about children not in school, so that there is that kind of oversight of their safeguarding, as well as the practical work that we do with them to re-engage. I have talked in the report about the main barriers to attendance, which we've touched on a little bit while we were talking about looked after children. Again, in Northumberland, as in nationally, the main barriers to school attendance at the moment are health and social barriers. They're not necessarily about the schools themselves. So there are still friendship issues, bullying issues that might impact on attendance for an individual child. But we're really looking at the post-COVID anxiety that a lot of children and their families still experience, things like domestic violence at home, children experiencing that or seeing that is also a barrier. And of course the cost of living crisis has affected families who didn't struggle before to get their children to school and are now for the first time. And we're seeing all of that factor into overall attendance and obviously persistent absence. So we do work really closely with early help and with social care to understand those barriers to attendance and to help the families to overcome them. Children who we describe as at risk of missing out on education are those children who are receiving an education but are not necessarily at school in the normal school day. So they're children who might be on part-time timetables, there might be an alternative provision, there might be children who do get a lot of suspensions, which means that they're absent from school. So we have a multi-agency process to find out who those children are, but also to put plans in place to get them back in school. And Sarah chairs what we call a tracking panel for that group of children. And this year we've included more agencies on that panel. So we now have people like primary mental health represented there. And that's made an instant difference to the quality of the plans to get those children into school. So that's working really well, and I'm hoping that will show in the data, in the attendance data before the end of the year. The DfE is also monitoring patterns of absence across the country for children who aren't in school full time. We're now required to send them a termly return of children who are on those part-time timetables, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how the national picture develops and where Northumberland sits in that context, and how the DfE might respond to that around further guidance or further actions. So we can wait and see. So the third group are electively home educated children. So they're parents who have made the choice not to send their children to school, but to educate them either at home or to send them to a different provider or to arrange different kind of learning experiences for them. So those numbers in Northumberland, as they did in England, rose during the pandemic. In Northumberland, they've really stabilised. We still have quite a high number. It's just short of 400, but the numbers have stabilised. We fulfil our duties regarding children who are electively home educated through Sarah's team, through education welfare. Our arrangements are also inspected by Ofsted as part of the children's social care inspection, and in the 3 inspections I've been involved in over the last 12 years, that we've always come out of that as it being a strength. So within the constraints of the current legislation, we do have arrangements in place to safeguard those children and ensure they're receiving a suitable education, and that includes networking with equivalent services in other local authorities. However, there are some changes that we would welcome if the DfE introduced them. So, for example, we would like to be able to provide more support to children who are electively home educated or doing GCSEs, for example. We would like to be able to provide support in some way. And also something like at the annual review that all electively home educated children have, that actually we're able to see the children at those reviews. We would like to see something like that introduced. So we are expecting further detail and guidance from the DFE by September this year, but I've said that many times before. Hopefully it will be on the DFE's agenda and prioritised for us. Since writing this paper, we have now got information available from the careers team about school leavers in 2022 who were electively home educated, and I know this is of interest to councillors. So last year there were 51 young people, so in the equivalent of year 11, who by the 1st of September were 16. So I can tell you that out of those, nearly 3/4 of them are in education, training and employment now. A significant number are in further education colleges, but quite a few of them are also in school sixth forms. So they have gone back to school post-16. And also another encouraging aspect of that is that for those who are not yet in education, training and employment, they are all known to the careers guidance team, and they are working with them to find suitable pathways for them. The DFE is also aware of the view of local authorities, and there's a piece of work underway at the moment commissioned by the DFE, which is looking into the positive aspects of elective home education. And we have been invited to participate in that through one of our education welfare officers who was nominated by a family who electively home educate to show what a strong relationship she has with them and how she supports them in educating their child at home. So we're really pleased to be able to take part in something that perhaps gives a more balanced overview of elective home education and the positive sides of that for the local authority and for the children, as well as some of the aspects that we might like to see change.
Okay, Councillor Deal.
Thank you for that report. I think these type of reports, I look at them and I just have real concerns about some of the things that you actually have little control over. So if you've got the key issues, you've got the economic deprivation is currently one of the main barriers to education in Northumberland. Parents are responsible for ensuring, etc. goes on. And I think Mark Swinburne and you probably agree is that that's something that should go into the inequalities working group. Because it is part of inequality, and it's how you manage that when it's very difficult for you to manage because you're actually managing the outcomes in some way. I know you work hard to make a difference, but it's always not easy. And also when you're saying it's suitable, however, more parents are telling us that the cost of living crisis is making it difficult to send their children to school, and it would be quite interesting to find out what are the difficulties. I mean, I mentioned about children about 2 meetings ago who were sent home because they couldn't afford the school blazer. Do you remember that? Now, I just think we need to address that type of things. And what are the difficulties? Is it transport or what is it? I don't know. But I think that type of thing, surely there's some way we can actually manage that as a council, or even to understand more about not just the cost of living crisis, to understand the whole background behind that, because we are talking about children who are living in a different environment to what we had, say, 10 years ago or further. We've had COVID, we've got economic issues, there's all kinds of things, and actually we have got the inequalities working group, and I know when I've spoken to other officers that we've got a grasp of this. Because it does, in the end, it does have in the end, the children, we want them to have outstanding education and really good career opportunities. And it's so important that we understand that, it's not their fault. It's the environment they're living in some cases. And I just think it's very hard. It's very hard for you. I see it, but I don't see it because I don't have a deprived area. But in the deprived areas, it must be very difficult to manage. All I say is, you do a tremendous amount of work, but it's going to be ongoing, and I think you need a lot more support, maybe, I don't know, financial support to get to the group, because these children, we need to ensure that they go through the education system and actually get all the opportunities that are available to them.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And it is really challenging work simply because of the volume of it at the moment. But I don't think we feel that we work alone, certainly within children's services. And you know, this new guidance is multi-agency. And the message I was giving to school head teachers about this last week is we know you can't do this on your own. And we're not expecting you to do it on your own. We can all make a contribution in a different way. But yes, it is an inequality, and I think it needs to sit in that context for what's going on in Northumberland at the moment. Sarah, I don't know if you've got examples of how the cost of living has specifically affected.
Yeah, just from what some of our parents are telling us, sometimes they can't afford to put the heating on to dry the uniforms. If they're not entitled to free school meals, sometimes providing a lunch is quite difficult, and it's cheaper to feed the children at home than it is to send them to school and do it. So it's a wide range of issues. All of our schools are really supportive to the families, but you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes families find it really difficult to share that information with you. So, you know, that's where kind of we try and build relationships with them, but it is a whole range of issues as to why families are struggling.
One more question to go with the... Just when you say school attendance records, obviously it's part of the Ofsted inspection. Do we have the record number of school absence to see how they've gone down? I don't know whether it's easily available from all the schools from their Ofsted reports, but maybe they're a little bit early, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue at the minute, and one of the reasons the electronic system will be more helpful to us, is that we don't have access to all of the school's data all of the time. Mm. Academies, for example, have to share that with us, or we then have to wait to get statistical reports from the DFE, which aren't live. They, in fact, sometimes can be a year behind with the publication of the data. But with the electronic system, we're certainly trialling that at the moment to be very hands-on with what's going on in the schools. And it's quite a sophisticated system that they've introduced. And from my initial discussions with head teachers, they're really quite encouraged by it as well. But yeah, certainly in future reports that I might write for you, we'll be able to put more data in there.
Can I just ask, is it possible for the council to provide a service for those areas where there's a lot more deprived people who are not accessing school because of their school clothing, to dry clothes, a tumbler dryer in a community centre or whatever? Difficult thing to manage, but in a way, it's something that you might be able to look at. Let's be more helpful, more proactive rather than reactive.
I think just reinforcing the point about the partnership working as well, and the point you made, Councillor, about the link with the inequalities working plans. One of the things is making sure the poverty and hardship plan that we're developing, making sure that all of our staff know the range of services and supports, financial or otherwise, that are out there in the communities. And that is something that's also significantly developed in Northumberland. So picking up where there are challenges, the partnership working across the wider community-based and inequalities work, I think, links into what you're saying, rather than us specifically doing that solely within children's services. I think we've got a good partnership and developing partnership working to respond to that. Sorry, Chair, just the other point, just to clarify about the inspection, Ofsted inspection elements. The Ofsted inspection of the local authority children's services that Jane referred to earlier is around effectively the safeguarding elements for children missing education. Fine, yeah, that's fine.
Right, Councillor Fairless-Aiken and then Councillor Ball.
Thank you. Where to start? Yes, attendance is an issue, clearly. And I'd like to come back to something you said earlier about trust and trusting teachers to know who the persistent offenders are, because actually 96% is high for a healthy adult, and it only takes a couple of days for a health issue for the child to drop below that, and that to seem a problem when it's not. And I'd much rather the focus was on the children that teachers knew were the problem. And anyway, that's a side issue. But coming on to the elective home education, yes, 34% is a big rise, and it's across the country, which to me points to more systemic issues within the education system itself and the national curriculum. The home education groups I've talked to have been very interested that this has come under the umbrella of attendance. It's quite negative, and I was quite relieved that you pointed it into the positive approach at the end, because a lot of them do a very, very good job. They're amazing people, and they've got very good results. You were saying that, more support. You'd like to give them more support. Certainly they find that the website is very outdated. The local authority website is outdated on advice and issues in the things that they're recommending. And also, they're finding it very hard to get test centres for external candidates. I don't see that we have any in Northumberland. We have one in Ferry Hill and one in Whitley Bay, Tyne and Weir. And it's very hard for them to get to. That's a long period of time for the examinations, as you know. I'd like more help with that. I'd like us to go to our high schools and secondary schools in Northumberland and ask them to get on board with this. They do get money per child, but I think the worry is that the figures will affect their figures for the exams. So I would very much like to see that, and I think that would show you sort of reaching out to those parents, because that is an issue. The other issue, and it ties in with what Councillor Dale said, is money. And I find it incredible that they pay for their exams. So, you know, if they're out because of these cost of living reasons and they're being expected to pay for their exams, which are the targets that we're measuring them by, how does that tie up? I find that incredible, and I wonder if that's an issue for Cabinet to look at.
I agree with what you've said, and I think that's why I've made the point that we are welcoming changes in the current arrangements for parents who exercise their right and that choice to electively home educate their child, the vast majority of who do it incredibly successfully. So we are looking for the same things as you do. At the minute, you have to be able to afford to electively home educate your child. If you want them to have those level opportunities that other children who attend school have, you have to pay for the exams, you have to pay for all of those resources. And I think that's what I meant by saying we'd like to offer more support, and that was a particular example there, because we know through the work of the team, parents really struggle to find the centres to do the exams and things like that. And we never say no when the families approach us. And of course, any of the support I'm talking about is if the families want it. Nobody's going to be forcing support that's not wanted or welcomed. But I think I'm agreeing with what you've just said, is that yes, we would like to be able to develop that positive relationship the local authority could have with families, by ironing out some of those unfair aspects of choosing to educate your child other than at school.
Councillor Ball.
Thanks, Chair. So I have a few questions on this report. I would have liked more detail and some more numbers, to be perfectly honest, because I think you almost have to go looking for them a little bit on page 3. So for me, I want to know things like, when you mention things like the health and social care issues, so are people having to homeschool because there isn't the placements in mainstream, so they feel there's no choice but to homeschool? Obviously, you've got that extra impact of, if you're homeschooled, it's that whole experience of being within school, so the friends that you make, the future chances, the things that you get to take part in because you've attended school. So I would like some more details on that. I would like to know what the measurables are when we mention safeguarding. Actually, how many times, if you homeschool your child, will you get a visit? Because is it once a year? Is it once every 18 months? And because when you look at one of the sections about the Children's Commissioners, where it says that compared with our European neighbours, England has the highest proportion of peoples, but the lowest amount of regulations, that makes me go, ah! And if we've got, yes, the number is coming down, but we still have a number, and obviously we see the horror stories in the press. If we haven't got that contact, and the team do fantastic work, but I do have concerns about that. And from somebody that was affected by the cost of living crisis over 30 years ago, who skipped school because I had trainers that marked the sports hall rather than go to PE and get grief week in, week out, I think it's tragic that we've got the same situation in 2023, and the cost of living impact is having people not go to school. When it comes to things like not just the school uniform and the number of items that you need, which obviously I know everybody knows how passionate I am about this, but study guides, that if you want to get on and do better, you have to purchase them. So again, I would like some more information on this, because we talk about inequalities and how we're going to do better, but actually I think we need to really drill down into some of the reasons why people are not being educated. Is it that they're not the skill set to be able to support the young person within school, or not the right kind of places for the health and social care reasons? Is it down to the cost of living? Because I just think it's really tragic in 2023 if that's the case. So yeah, I would like a bit more information on that, please.
Okay, point taken again, Councillor. A lot of that information is available. I just haven't included it in the report. There is quite a lot we don't know about families who electively home educate, especially if their child has never been to school. So we know quite a bit about children who are coming off a school role, because Sarah's team do a lot of work with the school and with the family before the child is then taken off the role. So we do know the reasons why the parent is deciding to do it. We do understand what the child's experience of school has been. We know quite a lot of that information. I mean, I think in terms of it informing our understanding of the rise in the numbers, or why our numbers are quite high, it actually doesn't really help with that, because across the county there isn't a consistent reason, or even a number one reason. There's, you know, there are lots of different reasons, and one doesn't stand out above another. We continue to monitor it, obviously. I monitor that half-termly with Sarah and through the performance information. But then it gets to the stage, as Sarah said, where when a child has come off a school role, we can find out very little more about them other than at the annual review. It's only once a year that we're able to go and see the families and ask them to provide us with that information. And we don't have to see the child at that review. The parent doesn't have to let us in the door. They can send us photographs, they can send us information. So in terms of the regulation, I think that's what we're looking around, is that perhaps a little bit more regulation will be more supportive of the children and the families, depending on what that regulation is and how it's introduced. But we would like to look at or see more of that introduced. But yeah, again, point taken about the data.
Right. I've got one more. We've spent a fair bit of time on this. Councillor Watson.
You've just touched on there something that Caroline brought up, that you don't have a lot of data about why people are homeschooled. I'm really, really curious, because just not long ago at FACS we got brought the SEND strategy, which is the first time the council have done that, and I welcome that report. I think it's excellent. But does that mean that we don't know the figures of children that are potentially homeschooled who have SEN needs? Are they being fed into that strategy? Do we have those figures? Because there was one area that I had concerns about, which was in the west of this county, where they were saying that there wasn't the evidence there. But if you're saying you don't know the information, how do we know that we're not missing those children in that SEND strategy?
So if they come off a school role, we do know if they've got special educational needs, and if a child comes off role at a special school, they have to have permission from the local authority. So, and then we monitor their reviews through the reviews of their EHCPs. So if they've come off a school role, we would know if there was a SEND issue. It's just those other children that maybe move into county and we don't get that information, or they've never been on a school role in Northumberland. So at the minute, for example, we've got 32 children who are home educated that have an education and healthcare plan.
So you know the ones that have come off, but what about the ones who haven't had an identified need at the time, so that we know that there's delays in getting some people the identification? So what about those children later on?
Well, once the family have decided to electively home educate, it's not our role to interfere in that. In fact, the parents very much don't want us to do that. So we wouldn't be able to ask those questions unless there was an EHCP involved. But the sort of K code, the additional needs that would fall into that SEND umbrella note is a gap.
Right, I've got Councillor Renner Thompson to wrap this up.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to echo the sentiments of the committee. I think we need to get a breakdown in the data between the number of children that are electively home educated and those that are not going to school because they can't afford to go to school. They're two very different cohorts of people. Electively home educated children stereotypically tend to be from wealthier families, because someone has to stay at home and not work to look after said child. If there are children out there that aren't going to school because they can't afford to, then that's something we need to very seriously look at. We already pump millions of pounds into supporting disadvantaged families around education and schooling, but if there are some that are slipping through the net, then that's something we absolutely have to take up. So some more data on that would be much appreciated.
Right, you can see the recommendations. Are we happy? Move on. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Item 8, social worker recruitment and retention. Mary Connor.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report that's produced in relation to the social worker recruitment and retention, linked to the, we have to provide a report back to, or return back to the DFE in terms of our social worker rates. So really, I guess what I'd highlight is that the recruitment of social workers, recruitment and retention of social workers continues to be a national issue. And you'll see in there that there's some national statistics from 2022 in terms of the number of social workers who've left the profession and the turnover rate, which is significantly high. And also the fact that the number of staff who are leaving the profession are, in the majority, less than 5 years at frontline practice. So that is a national challenge for all of us, and one that the social care review that was led by Josh McAllister highlighted, and just this morning there's been the government response to that review has been published, which acknowledges some of those challenges and is talking about investing more in social work apprenticeships around an early career framework, and doing some consultation on the use of agency staff, which are probably three of the biggest key challenges for us in terms of how we recruit staff into the profession from different routes, how we maintain our social workers and give them that kind of learning and development framework, and how we deal with the challenges around the agencies that employ our staff and offer higher pay rates, but also charge local authorities significantly more than we would pay if we had our own social workers. Regionally, there is ongoing work around the workforce challenges, and there has been a memorandum of understanding in place for a number of years around the pay rates with agency staff. That's become more challenging over kind of recent years, as all local authorities in the region experience shortages of staff, and there's further work, I think, that will be ongoing in response to the consultation that's been announced around agency staff, because as you can imagine, for local authorities, particularly those where perhaps their Ofsted rating isn't as good as they would want and they're under significant scrutiny, there is real pressure on them to get social work staff into their services to kind of do the required work. Within Northumberland, the turnover rate has been 15.9%, which is slightly higher than last year and obviously slightly higher than the national average. And there isn't any clear reason around why staff are leaving. I would say it probably reflects the national picture, which is moving to agency roles, moving out of frontline safeguarding social work, or choosing different career paths, with a few staff retiring. We have had a small number of staff who have turned from other roles or for a promotion. We only had a small number of agency staff as of September, but some of that, to be honest, is because actually recruiting agency staff is really challenging, because actually things called project teams, which is where a local authority employ a kind of a whole group of social workers through a kind of an agency as a project team, is taking up a lot of the agency staff who are out there. So actually finding single agency staff is a real challenge. The sickness rate has been quite low, but I would say that that's probably rising since those numbers were published, and that's, I think, in relation to how staff are feeling on the front line in terms of the stresses that they have. However, there are some positives. Our ASYE Academy continues to be a real strength for us. We continue to get a really high calibre of applicants for that, and it's seen as a really good piece of practice across the region and more widely in terms of the model that we've had. And from the staff cohort recruited in 2021, all 16 of those staff are still within Northumberland. Our challenge is to maintain that and maintain them kind of post that kind of 3, 4, 5 years working with us. And our most recent focus visit in July, the feedback was that the inspectors were really positive about what social workers were saying to them about working in Northumberland. However, I think we just have to acknowledge that it is really difficult to recruit experienced social workers from outside the authority, and that has created some real challenges for our staff who are in the frontline social work teams. And whereas in the past it maybe was that it would be one team, I think what I would say is in the last 12 months, all of our frontline social work teams have experienced that challenge at differing points and are continuing to experience that, and that's demonstrated in the number of staff who are working above their workload capacity, which is not what we would ever want. What I would say is that we do have an incredible set of staff who are working with us, who work incredibly hard and genuinely go over and above to do the best for the children and families who are open to our social work teams, and that includes not just the frontline social work staff but the team managers and the senior managers who think of creative and inventive ways to support staff and are all really passionate and committed to supporting those children and young people. So I'd want that acknowledged really, that despite the challenges, we are still committed, and those staff are still committed to providing the best service possible to those children and families, and we still see lots of really, really positive outcomes for the children and families who are working with our social work staff. So in terms of what we're doing next, there are a number of actions that we've got a workforce group that is looking at this and really drilling down on that, and it's something as senior management group that we are continually looking at and talking about, and particularly in light of some of the thoughts coming out of the care review around the idea of family help and how we use staff with other qualifications other than just social work to support and work with families in a more creative and kind of seamless way, both as a benefit for families but also as a response to some of the staffing challenges with social workers. So you'll see a list of kind of the things that we are doing. I mean, just to pick out a couple of them that we've done that have kind of supported what staff have told us. So we did some survey work with staff over the summer, and these are as a response to that. So we've increased the flexible working arrangements for staff and looked at their work bases as a response to what staff were telling us about the cost of petrol, and so tried to make it so that staff are not having to travel huge distances from home to their work base where possible. We've looked at funding Social Work England registrations for frontline and operational managers this year, in recognition that that's an additional cost that they have to bear to continue to be social workers. We're looking at ways in which we can, I suppose, support career progression in different ways. We're piloting some specialist teams because that's something that sometimes social workers are interested in a specialist area, and keeps them in the authority because it's an attractive post. And I think as a senior management team, what we try to do is be visible and open leaders, and encourage and support feedback through things like our practice days, through attending team meetings, through our leadership pledge, to really kind of promote and support that idea that we are open to challenge and we are a learning culture as an organisation.
Okay, well, I go back a long time, and this isn't new. It's been around a long time, the retention and recruitment. Councillor Watson, Councillor Dale, and Councillor Ball. Who was first?
You said mine first. I'm going to go and jump in. Thank you, Chair. I would just like to reiterate the thanks to the staff, because I think they do an absolutely fantastic job under the pressures that they have. And I know, like you say, that some of the numbers of the cases that they're working with aren't ideal, and we don't want to see that continue. If any way we can try and improve on that. So, I mean, a couple of things on here. You've said that you don't know all the reasons to why people are moving on, but you did mention agency, and I would say in this report it would be nice to drill down a little bit more about the cost of living. You've talked about petrol there, but obviously if somebody's then working from home, they've got additional things of heating the house and just, paying for their electric. So I just wonder if that's something that can be looked at in a bit more detail with staff to really kind of get an idea of exactly what things they are struggling with. And also I'd just like to see some benchmarking about other authorities in this, about what the figures are across the North East, Because ultimately, I think if people are going to agency roles, there's a couple of things there, isn't there? When you're an agency staff member, you can choose if pressure gets too much to kind of leave that particular role and go somewhere else, but also you're going to be paid a bit more money. Thank you.
Graham, do you want to you?
Yeah, I lead on regional work in relation to the agency, and we certainly give more detailed information, but we, in terms of benchmarking, we're probably in the middle in terms of our workforce data that we've got. We're certainly not an outlier in any way, shape or form, but there are very particular challenges that does need a national solution in terms of managing the agency market. And so we've just seen the announcement this morning in response to the independent care review from last year that talks about a consultation in response to the agency work. So there's nothing immediate about that, but we have tried to manage the agency market in the North East, and we did reasonably effectively, but that has changed, as Mary said, because there's been a growth in what are called project teams. There's a whole lot of information there, but just to be assured we are working as well as we can regionally to work together to manage that market, but it does need a national response in terms of trying to improve the stability of the workforce within the local authority social work.
Councillor Ball? It was dead heat.
Okay, right then. So, amazing. I love the team. I love the Social Work Academy. I do have a number, when it comes down to staff, none of us are getting any younger. So there will be people naturally leaving because they're taking retirement, etc. What are we doing to make people want to go into social work? So it's 16, because it's all well and good, we've got a social work academy, once you're qualified there's somewhere to go, but actually it's 16-year-old, what we're doing to work with the health and social care courses locally. Do you want to go into adult social work? Do you want to specialise? Actually having them conversation, and it's a real chicken and the egg, because the social workers are so busy they can't do engagement outside to make people want to be social workers. But I think there's a real key area for development there. Also, when we look at the care setup, I think there's a real opportunity for us to come up with some great stuff and actually take the lead with our the Social Work Academy, but drop it down from the age of 16, and actually we take the lead and train our young people at 16 into health and social care. So if there is an interest there, actually this is your career development and pathway through. With regards to the agency stuff, I've mentioned this in other meetings. I would personally love to see either the councils work together, or Northumberland County Council actually start our own agency and cut out the profits that they're not going to the social workers, they're going to the agency themselves. So actually if we could create our own agency, our own bank, where we can pay the staff a little bit extra if they do want to do them extra hours. I think there's an opportunity there, because that money is just leaking away. And I just think there's an opportunity again with working for schools. And naturally, if the social workers' caseload's going up, it's not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of stresses and strains that would make people also consider, when you look at like pay rates and stuff, and maybe less stressful areas that with a good degree you could go into. So I just think there's a number. Yes, it's about the figures, but I think there's also that background work that could be done. But I understand, because this team's so stretched, it's finding how to be able to do that. Thank you.
Mary, and then Graham.
Yeah. So just to pick up on a couple of those things, because I think you're absolutely right. We need to be making social work a kind of a career of choice, and there is already. So just to let you know that there is work that already happens from our learning and development team and our principal social worker, and kind of the training leads around social work with our both our colleges but also our universities about why social work and social work in Northumberland is a career of choice. But the other thing that we're doing a lot of is around growing our own. So what we've had in Northumberland, I mean the government have announced 500 additional social work apprenticeships. We've had the social work apprenticeship kind of route in Northumberland for a number of years, and we've been able to develop a number of staff who had different qualifications, who have worked for Northumberland in different roles and have gone through and been supported to go through the social work degree as an apprenticeship. We've also had staff who've gone through the sort of the first line programme and the return to social work programme and different routes. So we are continuing to look at that, but I think what we see is the grow your own model is a really strong one, because what we get is people who are committed to working in Northumberland, who find it a positive place to work, find children's social care a positive culture, but want to develop. And we've had some of those discussions in our management group last week about how we can develop that further. So no, I absolutely agree that we need to be thinking creatively about the different ways in which we can bring people into social work. Yeah. And then I think in relation to I was going to say, what was your second point? Was something around. I think in terms of the staff bank, I mean, we have looked at that, and I think it's and we have had a couple of social work people who've either semi-retired who've wanted to stay on the staff bank, and we've been able to use them. I think it's a challenge, isn't it? Because actually what we don't want to do is disadvantage our staff who have committed to a permanent role in our teams. So I think that there's always that balance with that. But I totally accept what you're saying in terms of thinking about how we can do that kind of peripatetic staff approach differently rather than through agency.
Graham?
Just very quickly, regionally, we have also looked at that option. It is being considered in another region in the country, but there are significant challenges and difficulties and legalities to make that happen, and certainly not happen that quickly. So we have looked at it locally. We're working with and have linked across to the other region that is a bit further ahead than us, but that takes some years for them to get to that point. So I don't think it's a quick fix solution, but it's something we've looked at regionally.
Okay, Councillor Dale.
Thank you very much for the report, Mary. Can I just ask one or two things? First of all, it would be good to know how many social workers we would actually like, which would, to fulfil your work, which is highly responsible, and it goes on to courts and all kinds of things. So it has to be, and it would just be an idea, because I can see the turnover, I can see the various figures, but anyway, that would be just a nice figure to know, because it's always great. Secondly, I do know, and this is not just across social workers, children's social work, but also the broader sector of social workers. I've had issues in my area, and it's actually fundamentally a problem with recruitment of certainly social workers, but even other positions as well, where I email the council and they say, well, I'm sorry, we can't recruit at the moment. That's something else. Not as important. I mean, this really is important, social worker, whether it's on social work, adult or children. They're really, really integral to the safety of our children and also to our older people in particular as well. I just think I think anything you can establish to highlight the brilliant work they do, and it's a really good job. It's working with people, helping them, making sure you care for them properly, and working with obviously within the government guidelines, etc. It's very challenging, but it must be very rewarding as well. And I think we need to get that over, because I think, go out and really rewarding work. And the last one is, which has been picked up on the report, reducing bureaucracy. I'm sorry, but I just think the red tape that is going on in the services, you know what you need to do. You know what you need to do to ensure you meet all the safeguarding guidance and everything else. What we don't need is added bureaucracy, red tape, I call it. And I think that goes across lots of things everywhere. My husband's always complaining about red tape, more red tape. But particular, you want to be able to get on with your job. So I would say send a message back to the independent reviewers that you support that one totally. So you can get more people in and get on with the job, and actually tell everybody it's a great job, working with children, working with adults. We can help.
Anybody? I've got one more councillor. Do you want to take? I'll take Mark Swinburne, and then we'll come back. No, I've got two councillors.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a few things here. Firstly, thank you, Councillor Ball, for the second time in this meeting, reminding us that there's a few of us knocking on a bit, apart from yourself. Councillor Dale, you just said there, how many would you like? And Graham's eyes lit up because he was going, whoa, how many can I have? Yeah. So obviously, Mary, it's worrying when the report says about staff working above workload capacity. What I'm pleased to see in here is about the sickness rate, which has fallen. Now, I'm presuming, and I might be wrong here, but I'm presuming the previous sickness rate would have had an effect because of the COVID information, but I might be wrong on there because I don't know what was in there. This report in itself, as Guy will be familiar with, is probably the 6th one we've seen, and it's a similar theme year on year with the same sort of information that's in here. If we didn't have the academy up and running, I'd dread to think what state would be in. The agency information, I know from previous reports we've had that not everyone jumps for the agency for the money, because sometimes it's just the way they like to work. They might want to work for a few months and then not work for the rest of the year, and it's just because they like to work. It's not just about the money. And this isn't unique. This information isn't unique to Northumberland. It's throughout the whole country. But as Councillor Dale said, it is very challenging, this work, but it can be very rewarding as well. But I just really wanted to point out that this isn't anything new. It comes back year after year. It's something that everyone's working to improve, but it's not just for Northumberland.
Right, I'll take Councillor Fairless Aiken, and then we'll close up on this one.
Right, yes, thank you for that. Following on to last year's report as well, it's a big surprise really, but the figures are frightening on retention, certainly, and experience level that is within the workforce. And like Councillor Ball and Councillor Dale, I'm all for recruiting new, young, enthusiastic people, but a lot of this smacks of some of the retention problems can be within inexperienced workforce, and I'm wondering how much of the workforce that is experienced is allowed to mentor, how much mentoring goes on between those with that knowledge and those who are just very new to the job, and in thinking how much of that goes on.
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of the social workers' first year in practice is they're very much supported and nurtured by the team managers, but also by other staff, so by the principal social worker, and then when they're placed within the team that they're going to be in, they're linked up with a more experienced social worker, usually one of the advanced practitioners, and very much kind of nurtured and supported, and that then carries on after their first year. So I think that within the teams there is lots of ways and lots of mechanisms to try and support staff, and the feedback we get from our newly qualified staff, or kind of in their first 2 or 3 years, is that they feel that they've had that support. I think that there's like I say, there's a number of reasons why people leave the profession, particularly the frontline safeguarding profession across the country, and some of that is because of the work-life balance side of things. Some of it is because actually they develop a specialism in particular areas and want to move into that, and some of them, it's hard. I think it's just to acknowledge it's hard work. It's there is that kind of referred trauma that workers experience when they're going into difficult situations and hearing difficult stories. And one of the things that we're trying to explore is looking at what else we can do to support staff with their emotional health and well-being needs and build their resilience as well, because I think we just need to acknowledge that it is hard hearing that day in, day out, and supporting children who've experienced that, and parents as well who've experienced that, and that they need to be supported to be as resilient as they can be.
Okay, right. Do you want to?
Well, I just appreciate the comments from members here about appreciating the difficulty and the challenge of being social worker. It can be rewarding. It is extremely challenging. I would, as with Mary, we would want to say that publicly, but would be very appreciative if you can continue to say that wherever you are in terms of pushing that. And I will say, obviously, we focus on social work, but as Councillor Dale said, other parts of our service are struggling to recruitment, like residential as well. So I don't want to forget the other areas, but particularly social work is acutely challenging for us. So appreciative of the comments and appreciative of the support for our staff, which is critical.
Right, we note the report. We're happy to move on. Time's up against it. Item 9, domestic abuse. We have Leslie Pyle on page 125. Right, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. The report to bring today was to give an update and assurance of the position that we're in the current domestic abuse multi-agency partnership arrangements and service provision in Northumberland, ensuring that we're meeting the requirements of the new statutory duties that were brought in under Section 4 of the Domestic Abuse Act in 2021. And the Domestic Abuse Act was brought with it a number of requirements for local authorities, including the provision of support for survivors of domestic abuse and their children in safe accommodation and support services, and very importantly, recognising children as victims in their own rights. The duties cover safe accommodation as refuge accommodation, specialist safe accommodation, dispersed, sanctuary schemes, and move on or second stage. The local authority also has a requirement to establish a domestic abuse local partnership board that meets quarterly and supports the local authority in performing certain functions. We have a duty to assess need and demand for accommodation-based support for victims and their children, and also including those who require cross-boundary support. We have to prepare and publish strategies for provision of support to cover the local and diverse groups of victims and give effective strategies for making commissioning and decommissioning decisions. We've got to ensure the support needs of all victims and their children, and we've got to be able to ensure that we can monitor and evaluate local delivery and report back to central government. In Northumberland, we started before the Act came into place. We set up a task group that looked at the actual domestic abuse bill at the time and put a lot of consultation and preparation work in place. In preparation for the Act, we had looked at the guidance around the need for a partnership board and who should be part of that. And the first board went live on the 29th of June as required, with Graham Wright, our Service Director of Children's Social Care, chairing that. We had a requirement to have the first strategy published by the 5th of January, which that was, and it's on our website there. And it was informed by the needs assessment that we was undertaking. We do, as a local authority, have white ribbon accreditation, and we have had that for just over a year now. And it's very much the two agendas are very linked about the support for victims, their children, survivors, and those causing harm, as well as looking at that agenda to reduce and prevent violence against women and girls. But it's very much about how those two strategies are linked and having that joint overall vision that is in the report. A main part of the duty is ensuring that we do have that support and provision in place, the safe accommodation and support. And for that, we went through consultation and procurement period and went live with our new integrated domestic abuse service from the 1st of April last year, ensuring that we can provide support for those suffering domestic abuse for all levels of risk, severity, regardless of age. There is support for children and young people within that support service, and we fully meet our requirements as set out in the duties. We also have included targeted provision for in the rural areas of North and West, understanding some of the additional barriers that we have in those areas. And we also include, as part of that over-integrated service, support for those causing harm who acknowledge the need to change their behaviour. We very much work on a no wrong door for service users approach. So we may have more than one provider, but it's very much how we work together, supported by ourselves as the local authority, to have that integrated no wrong door approach. The integrated service has 5 elements. The main larger part of the contract, and we have a lovely jigsaw image that sets out how they're all part of that overall provision with the service user residents at the centre, is the DASIN, the Domestic Abuse Support Service Northumberland, which the provider is Harbour. It provides an assessment hub for male and female over the age of 16, referrals, self-referrals and agency referrals. They will then assess and look at the most appropriate support that is needed at that point in time, and they also can refer internally around the different elements. There is the refuge, which is a female-only, single women with children, but also we're building on a dispersed properties model that meets our statutory duties to support those where refuge is not appropriate through age or male victims. We also have an independent domestic violence advocate service as part of that, which is very much for high risk. We have a sanctuary scheme which looks at targeted work within to keep people safe in their own homes and prevent homelessness. Outreach support, assertive outreach who need more intensive support, group work provision, and very much a service user voice.
Part of the new guidance and duty is to have the surveys user voice, both adult and child, at the Domestic Abuse Board. And we've put in our new contracts very much the element for the providers to work with their service users, their own and the other services, to ensure they can have that voice within our decision making. The service itself and agency referrals. The second part of the integrated service is a children's counselling, therapeutic and outreach support. Again, recognising as the strategy duty is now to recognise children as victims in their own right. It provides counselling and outreach support for those who've experienced domestic abuse with initial response, play therapy, counselling, and also has, again, a service user youth participation panel, which we've seen some really good work from. We also then, as the third part of the provision, is having a change in behaviour service. And they will work with both male and female over the age of 18 for those accepting that they are looking to change their behaviour and looking at the risk and the harm they are causing. But we will look at that whole preventative agenda, looking at how we can support engagement on a one-to-one and a group work basis. We also have a fourth element of the service, which is adult counselling, to provide the adult counselling for both male and female victim survivors over 18 to enable them to support them to cope and recover from their experiences. And then we have this, the fifth element, a particular service enders where we're looking at domestic abuse in rural areas to provide support for male and female residents to engage and support, and as well as offering that one-to-one work, the group work, working in partnership with the other providers, it's also to do with have the ability to do the raising awareness in those communities in order to have domestic abuse more openly discussed and look at the services and support that's available. In order to ensure we're also meeting our duties as well as the Commission services, we've also put in place some of and put funding towards internal positions to support us, and we might be knowing some of our main priorities. We have in the Business Intelligence Unit a part-time domestic abuse analyst who was appointed in March of last year, very much to support the board in developing a domestic abuse data dashboard to help and inform the board what the themes and trends are, monitor the effectiveness and improve our ability to do a needs assessment of what the level of need and demand is in Northumberland and inform the refresh of the domestic abuse strategy going forward. We've also put funding towards a part-time domestic abuse trainer who came into post in December 2021 to support the development and implementation of domestic abuse skills to ensure that our multi-agency staff have the skills and knowledge to identify and respond appropriately to domestic abuse. Housing is a particular part and key issue for our duties, and we've also allocated funding to a housing safeguarding officer who part of that role is key in working with support and housing to again respond and identify appropriately and have that quality level of provision for domestic abuse. And then we also have a child and parent violence abuse officer within the Northumberland Adolescent Service to support our wider work around child and parent violence and abuse that we have as a priority within our action plan. In order to look at a year down the line from having the new duties and the board and the strategy in place, we hosted a domestic abuse summit in October of last year, bringing together our multi-agency partners to really review and reflect on the progress that we'd made and identify the priorities for the board going forward. There was a really good committed turnout. It was a really excellent discussion. We had national, regional and local speakers and some workshops as part of that. They have identified some key priorities for us to take back to the board when it meets next week and to reflect on and think about how that will be implemented in next year's action plan. They look very much about a clear communication and awareness raising strategy for both staff and the community, to continue to develop that multi-agency and single agency domestic abuse training offer with a commitment across all agencies to prioritise staff attending, to develop and review the service offer and engagement in the rural areas, to provide evidence-based resources for schools and youth groups, and continue to strengthen that service user voice both from adults and children. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dale won this one.
Yeah, just to say thank you very much for the report. Can I just ask you, what do you think? Obviously, abuse at home is an awful thing, but actually it's across all areas of socio-economic group. It's not just deprivation, it's everywhere. And that's something we should all be aware of. Can I just ask you, I presume you work with the CAB, because I've got a lot of friends who do, and they obviously have a lot of people who come to them. I presume they just feed into you. And lastly, just for question. The domestic abuse in rural Northumberland, which is in the north and west of the county, have you put that special support in because you are aware of hidden abuse? And that's a question because obviously, I presume, because of that, you must actually have reasons behind why you've initiated that.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that?
If that's okay, Graham. Yeah. No, so the first one for the Citizens Advice Bureau, they are part of our Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Providers Group, which is a subgroup of the board.
Right.
And very much we're looking at them having a presentation at the next one in April, very much looking at ensuring that our service provision has clear links in with CAB and Frontline in Northumberland to really ensure that we're supporting families across for all their needs. So no, we're very clearly we're looking at how they can continue. They are discussing about what information and data they can feed into that forum as well. And then the rural areas, there was a national report and research into domestic abuse in rural areas that identified still some really key issues and barriers to people disclosing and engaging in domestic abuse service provision living in those rural areas, and that we needed to rural-proof our commissioning going forward. So we really took on that recommendation and looked at some of that data and information as part of our consultation on what was needed in the model going forward.
So, no, that's fine. I mean, obviously, it's interesting to see how it came down into the County Council, but thank you for that. And thank you for all the work you do.
Councillor Ball, I think it was.
Thanks, Chair. So, again, amazing work that you're doing, and it really should be applauded, the amount of work that you're doing. I'm just wondering, within the recommendations, obviously it's to note the report, but I would really like to see training for the councillors and staff as standard at induction, because domestic abuse, most people think it's within relationship, partner against partner, but actually it's in the domestic setting, so it might be a child against a parent, and if say a concern was raised with a counsellor, they might just simply dismiss it because, well, it's your child. So actually to be drill down into some of that and to make sure that everybody is aware of like that report it and any door is the best way than not doing anything about it. But again, I just want to say absolutely brilliant work that you are doing, and I would love to see, I know we can't make it statutory training, but I would love to see that there's some kind of element for councillors, because we do have 67 in every single part of the county, and I think it's a good resource for them to be out there.
Councillor Swinburne, I'll come back to you. I'll up against the clock a bit. But
thank you, Chair, and thanks for nicking some of my notes there, Councillor Ball. But this is such a serious issue. It affects any age, any sex, and that's on either side of the problem. What I wanted to ask, and maybe it's with a cabinet member here as well, raised with him, as chair of one of the local area councils, is it possible, because all of our members are part of a local area council and they're attended by the public, hopefully, is it possible to put together a presentation to show what there is on offer, what can be done, how to access these services, but also what the signs and triggers are to identify abuse, to be able to come out and come to the local area councils to present it to councillors and to the public to show what help is available and how to identify signs of abuse. And
so that is a request? That's
a request. That we put together something as a council to come out to all of the local area councils to show, you know, as Councillor Ball said, it's a bit of training, but to show to the councillors, but also show to the public what support is on offer and how to identify, because some people, unfortunately, don't realise that they're suffering the abuse or that their friends or family are suffering the abuse. And we can show, you know, how they can access these. You know, it might not be a case of sticking their hand up and going, I'm suffering, because they could be with their partner. But, you know, if we advertise it, that this is happening, they could say, oh, there's something at the council meeting, you know, and they could say, I want to go and report me next door neighbour's trees falling down, something like that. But they're actually going for that. And it gets it out in the open. that they can then go away and they understand how they can raise these issues in private.
I'll go to Guy.
Certainly, Mark. I think that's a good idea. I will liaise with Councillor Wendy Patterson, who's the adult wellbeing portfolio holder, and see if we can organise something, get something put together.
Something that we'll put it through the mince machine and you guys can think about or consider.
I think, sorry, Chair, one of the key issues is raising awareness about domestic abuse and what it is, and not using domestic violence just as the physical assaults. It's the range of ways in which domestic abuse manifests itself. So I think absolutely any opportunities we can take to develop awareness of and learning about and supporting how people in the communities can access those. So I think historically we've had a range of services at a higher level when it's more serious and more obvious, but I think the key bit for us is raising awareness around this out in the local communities and understanding where people can go and then how services can be accessed. So we'll happily look at how we can develop some training. Like the capacity is the issue we'll have to balance, but how we can get out and try and support some of that training and awareness raising, certainly.
Councillor Dale?
Yeah, I just say, I think that's very apt, like, set on that, because actually we are going to have concerns with economic issues, financial breakdowns in families and everything else. And I think that it is really good and apt to do that. We need to do it quickly so people are aware of, anything. They have got help and they can do some reporting. So I think that's a good idea. Brilliant.
Anybody else? Now, before I ask officers to... Anybody want to...
No, I think one of the reasons that's coming out of the Domestic Abuse Summit, this is going to a number of scrutiny committees because it affects everybody. Whether it's older people, and there's increased awareness of domestic abuse in relation to older people, but equally the key bit for us is now children are officially recognised statutorily as victims of domestic abuse, and obviously a lot of the work we do in social work, for example, domestic abuse will be a key factor. So one of the reasons we've agreed that this report should be brought to a range of committees is to raise awareness because of all the people who are impacted and affected by that.
Right. So that seems to be gathering pace. Guy has picked that up. Officers have picked that up. It might mean on the road to area committees, but that's what they're there for. Happy with that? Anybody else on this report before we move on? We note the report, but it's got a request in there. Okay. I'll move on to Family and Children Service Overview. Thank you, Leslie. Chris, it's you. Work programme.
Thanks, Chair. There's two things I want to raise on the work programme. The first is at the next meeting in March, there is an item missing off the work programme, which is Northumberland College will be coming to give an update on sort of the last 12, 18 months since they were last here. And then in April, the school transport review is scheduled to come to this committee. That's all I want to say. The rest is just a note.
Councillor Fairley-Saker.
Yeah, looking at their work programme going forward, I'd like to suggest a review or report into the procedures and policies in place in secondary schools for children accessing counselling and support services.
Can you put that through?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. It is already on there. It's used to be scheduled, and it's something Councillor Ball raised, and I've asked for it previously as well. It's about the school uniforms, and I'm wondering, because it has been raised again today, when will that report be coming?
Again, I'll speak to Sue and Audrey, and we'll try and put that in for the new year.
Okay. I see no further hands. I haven't any urgent business. So thank you for your attendance.